Hello, today we're working on the Chapter 13 exercises. We're at the top of page 522. And what we're actually doing here is we're going to use the technology that we've learned about in this chapter, which is really kind of a pretty important development in HTML5, and that is HTML5's capability of natively supporting drag and drop. And why that's important is it really kind of unlocks the browser to act like that application delivery mechanism that we are so used to within the operating system, right? The capability of clicking on an object, moving it somewhere, and then as a result of moving it somewhere or clicking on it, have it behave or react in a certain way. The fun part about this is we're actually building a game here, and it should give you some ideas, perhaps about other types of more graphical things that you can build. Drag and drop is used for a lot of different things, as you learned about in the chapter, not the least of which is like, adding like attachments to emails and things like that. And it's that tool within HTML5 that really kind of gave us that capability. All right, let's go ahead and follow the steps here. They do want us to create a new ASP.NET empty web application, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to New Project. And then I do want you guys to remember, I know that we have different versions of Visual Studio happening here, but that on some people's versions, this sub-menu entry where I'm finding this empty website is actually listed as previous versions, if I remember right. So just keep that in mind. So don't drive yourself crazy looking for different types of things in here. Most of the stuff that's going to be created is stuff that we're creating anyhow, so it doesn't really matter all that much. So we're going to create an empty ASP.NET website. They do want us to name it a particular way, so let's do that. And it's called Number Scramble. And then go ahead and click OK. All right, I'm going to expand my properties window here just a little bit. And let's go back over to the book. And they want us to begin by adding a few files. And these are kind of like a mechanical process. They kind of go into like kind of a routine with the book. So I'm going to pop through these steps pretty quick. So we're going to create a default HTML, a default CSS, a scripts folder, and a default JS file. It sounds familiar, right? This is the pattern we've been following. All right, and I'm going to move the book off to the other screen here. And I will let you know what steps I'm on as we go. All right, so let's go ahead and create the default HTML. I'm just going to right-click the root of the project and add an HTML file. Call it defaults. We're also going to add a default CSS file. That's going to go right in the root as well. Just choose style sheet. Just call it default.css. Create a scripts folder. And inside that folder, add a default.js file, just a JavaScript file. And then we also want to add Jquery to the project. So let's just go ahead right in the root of the project, do the NuGet package manager. And you guys know this routine. It's become second nature, right? And that's what happens, can you imagine if you were working professionally, you're doing this all the time, things become very routine. So even things that you might consider difficult now you can actually get used to doing them. All right, and there's our jQuery. All right, then we want to switch over to our default HTML file. And it does not have to be that zoomed in, but we want to put in a reference for the style sheet, the jQuery file. We'll just use the core one, that's fine. And then also default.js, preferably in this order. With any luck, if you're doing it correctly, you should look like step number 8, if everything's okay, or close to that at least. Then we're going to move on to steps number 9 and 10, and what we're going to do here is we're going to add some divs into the body section. One is an empty div, and one has a little bit of text in it. Basically, we're just setting up regions of the screen. So we're setting up a div that's going to display messages. So by default, you can see the first one with the ID of message is just going to say refresh to scramble. So it's just a message to the user that when they're going to scramble their number game, they can just do an F5 or hit the little refresh button and then get the game to redraw itself. And that's pretty common with HTML-based games. And then we're creating a div for the game board, and the author has a space in there because we are going to add some stuff in there. So let's go ahead and just save this file for now, and let's move over to the CSS file and start copying in some of the styles. One of the first style things that they're doing is they're just declaring a font family for the body, or for the whole document, if you want to look at it that way. And then we're just going with what we call our most basic sans serif fonts, and this is a real common font family listing, folks. Arial for PC fonts, Helvetica for Mac fonts, and sans serif for your generic. So that's a real common listing that you'll see. Subsequently, on page 524 at the top, there's a series of, I think, 4 or 5 styles here. Let's see if I can copy them all at once, that you can copy and paste in or type in if you're so inclined. And basically what we're doing here is we're just setting up stylistically the structures of all the components that are going up on the screen. So you can see we have a game board, looks like a square because same width and height. Margin left, right, auto, what is that going to do for us? It's going to center it on the screen. Now that's a trick that you guys learned pretty early on. Another way to do the same thing is to say margin 0 auto. That's another way to do it. But those techniques for centering, a lot of times you don't get taught this in a textbook. That technique for centering will not work unless you declare a width. So if I didn't declare a width, it wouldn't center anything. It's kind of interesting. You know how long it took me to figure that out? Weeks, like way back when. Now, it was a long time ago, mind you, but it took me a long time to figure it out. And then when I found somebody's website that explained it, it was like a revelation for me. I'm like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. If I don't declare how big or how wide it is, how am I going to center it? Right? So kind of like one leads to the other. We also have the message area. You can see that's going to have a black background and some alignment things, some centering going on. But then we're also dealing with these other pieces. And notice how these are classes and not IDs. So we're going to have all the little tiles that are in there. And so we're setting up the size and the shape. You see, once again, square shape, same height and width. We got a different background color, and then alignments and everything for text. And then we also have this thing called square, which is different than tile. But notice that it's the same height and width. So really what we're doing is we're creating a little container where the tiles will go into. Does that make sense? And then we also have styles declared here for drag. Now, if you guys read the chapter, of course you did, right? Yeah, some people actually do. I encourage that. I mean, you're spending money on the book in there as well. But we're applying a style to a thing called dragged, and that, once again, that's a class, and that's red in color. We do want to add actually do a save while you're at it, do Control S. Let's go over to the default.js, and we do want to add reference to Jquery here, so just drag and drop it over. And then they're setting up a couple of variables, one that counts the number of squares, and one that we're calling empty square with no value. You guys see any problem with my JavaScript here? How come there's no semicolon? I'm not. Yeah. It's a weird technology. Because really, I'm going to tell you what. Best practice, folks. You should put the semicolon there. You really should. But I don't know if you guys are learning this in your JavaScript class, because I know some of you are in there right now. But you can actually forego the semicolons in a lot of different situations. Because really what's happening here is the reason they're able to get rid of that is because we're using another var keyword, and a var keyword always is the initiator of a line. I'm not comfortable with doing that personally. I would always put the semicolon in. Think of, a good comparison is think of Java when you do like an if statement or any statement that's inside of another structure and it's a single statement, you don't have to terminate it. Because really it's isolated. What's isolating it is that var keyword. Pretty bizarre. So I think this is best practice, what I just did. You guys might disagree. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up the document ready function. And this is step number 13, which goes from page 524 to 525. And we're going to enter that in right here. And then let's take just a really quick look at the things that we're creating here. So obviously, we're calling upon, in kind of a strange fashion, and this is really following the demonstrations in the book, that we're doing a push. And a push is relative to a data structure. Now, we don't really have, in an associate's degree program, what we call a data structures course, because data structures really, it's kind of a theoretical concept, and then based upon those theoretical concepts, we write code so that our programs behave according to the theory. And if you were a computer science major, so if you guys went on to get a bachelor's degree in computer science, which a lot of people in this field do, they learn about data structures. Probably the only course in which we really talk about data structures per se in earnest would maybe be the database course, where you might learn about binary trees and things like that. But a push and a pop are relative to data structures that we call stacks. And the way I always like to think of a stack is have you guys ever gone to a buffet restaurant, and they have their dishes, and you go get your dish, and they don't have a big stack of them, they have them in this machine, it's got a spring, and they put the dishes in there, and it goes in, when you put a dish on there, you're pushing one onto the stack, and then when you're taking the dish off, you're popping it off the stack. So that's where that terminology comes from, push and pop. And have you guys ever seen an error on your computer, Stack Overflow? Or you guys go to the website all the time and look stuff up, right? But the reason that was developed is because a stack is a data structure that's basically an array that's only got one entry and exit point. And when we put stuff in it, it has to, whatever went in last has to come out first. You can't just rearrange the stack and pull out the bottom plate. Now, electronically, we can kind of do whatever we want. If it's an array, why can't we just pull it up off the bottom? Well, guess what? You actually can. But when you build a stack structure that's built on a theory, so that one point in and one point out, you leverage that. So we're kind of leveraging that data structure, and that's why we have a push statement here. Because we're going to be moving things. So every time we move something, we're going to be taking it from one location and pushing it into a different location. So popping it and pushing it. So when you see that terminology, that's where that stems from. Now you can see that we also have a couple of other methods that are being declared here, or functions, excuse me, in JavaScript. Create board and add tiles, and we're calling them from the document ready function. So what that means is when the page loads up, the page loads, it creates the game board, and it adds the tiles. And we will see these methods as we add them one by one. So I just like to explain that, so when you're reading the code, it makes a little sense to you, at least I hope. So often that's all an instructor can help, is that you kind of understand. And sometimes that might not make the most sense now, and it might really, I'm not kidding, click into your brain a couple years later when you encounter it in the real world. Because I know when I was in data structures class and I was being taught this stuff, I was like, okay, I get it. What's it good for? Or, okay, I did my assignment, now what? Right? But then you'll get out into the real world and you'll develop situations where you have to use that structure to make your program work from a logical perspective, and then you'll recall it and you go, oh, that was really clever. Right. And this is, what's interesting about these types of data structures, this conception has been around for 50 years plus. So think of the people that thought of that and why they would even go to the trouble of thinking of that. And what kind of programming problem were they trying to solve where they had to come up with something like this? So you got to give kudos to our past generations that were really the brilliant ones that came up with this stuff. All right, so let's take a look at the next method that we're adding, and that is the create board. And I'm going to see if I can get this more on one line here. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So what we're doing here is we're just running a for loop, and square count now, remember square count's generated up above, so we preset that at 16. Because that is a global variable, it should also give you the thought that maybe I could up that number and make a bigger board, or make that number smaller and make a smaller board. That is what you can do. So that's basically a loop that runs up to the size of that number. And then every time it goes through, notice what it's doing inside. We are actually via Jquery, right? That's what the dollar signs are for. So why is there a dollar sign from a square? Did you guys know that that's a valid character for naming of variables in JavaScript? You guys probably don't know that, unless like you're taking your JavaScript class and Christian like put a trick question on the exam for you. But if you read through the specifications for JavaScript, you cannot start with a number, but you can start with a letter, a dollar sign, or an underscore. Do you know why people use dollar signs often? Yeah, because it's kind of like a weird spillover from PHP. Why they're using it here, I'm not really sure, but we're going with it. Like if I was coding it, I would not put a dollar sign. Interesting, right? All right, so yeah, that's the name of the variable. It has nothing. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. It does not make it Jquery because there's a dollar sign there. But on the other side of the equal sign, guess what? It is Jquery. So the reason I'm taking the time to point this out is because I think that can be a confusing thing for somebody to look at if you're not in tune to what's happening. So that's why I'm pointing it out. Okay, let's look inside that statement though. And what are we actually doing here? We're putting together a div with an ID of square. And then notice it says data-square. What the heck is that? This is going back to the first couple chapters. This is one of the new capabilities of HTML5 is that we have the capability of declaring our own attributes that can pass values as long as we preface it with data dash. And we can take that data. So what's happening is when we take that mouse and we like click and drag something, it's actually, whatever we're clicking and dragging, it's got that attribute attached to it, and I'm moving that attribute from position A to position C, or whatever it is. So the data, it's not just the square we're picking up, but the data attached to the square is also moving. It's pretty cool. Pretty simplistic, but pretty cool. All right, and then notice that we're also applying a class to it. And then we have this Jquery command that's called append to. And basically all that does is it adds to the end of the structure. All right, I'll leave that at that. All right, the next method that they're going to add in, we're at the bottom of page 525, which is step number 15. is this function here, which is the add tiles. That's the other one that we saw in the document ready function. All right. So notice empty square, which we declared up above. Here we just declared it. We did not assign a value. But as soon as document ready runs, it will take whatever the square count is and subtract 1. Now, if you guys know the kind of game that we're building here, these little number scramble games, and when I was a kid, this is the kind of thing you'd go to like the Ben Franklin store, the 5 and dime store, or Woolworth or whatever. Like before they had dollar stores, we had nickel and dime stores, right? So we'd go in and we'd buy these bad plastic toys, and one of them was this little number scramble thing, and you'd move the tiles around. The only way you can move the tiles around is if you have one empty square, right? Because otherwise they're not going to move. They're locked in. That's the why. Once again, we got a loop going here based upon the number. So in this case, it'll be 15. And then for each one of those, we are going through and we're creating a tile for each position. And it's going to fill in each position. It basically is writing the HTML for us. And this is the part that is a little bit of a leap, right? That feels uncomfortable because we're using JavaScript to write our HTML. Could I just write the HTML that just creates all the structure? Yeah, why not? I absolutely could. There's no reason I have to create the board with JavaScript. The reason that they do this is to demonstrate that since it's a repetitive process, it's wiser to use a loop. And because I'm setting it up with variables that drive the whole thing, I could come up here, change this number to 32, and have a board twice the size. And it would all work automatically, right? So that would be the one thing. So you could hypothetically design a game board that's one size and then give the user like a drop down or a slider or whatever, some sort of a mechanism to type in a different number and change the game dynamically. So from a programming standpoint, it's kind of like forward thinking, right? It's like building a house and then remembering to put a door in so you can get into the house. No, that's not really a good example at all. That's a terrible example, but maybe you guys chuckle a little bit, so. Yes? All right, now that we have the code in, and we took a little bit of a sidetrack here in class to explain how this stuff works, but basically this code helps us to build the HTML that creates the board, and we talked about why bother to do it this way, and not, could I just write a bunch of divs in plain HTML? Of course you could. Why does the author do it like this? Because this is more efficient and allows for more flexibility. Plus, it shows you the logic for how to do it. All right, so let's go ahead. Step number 16 now, top of 526. We are going to set default HTML as the start page. And then we're going to go ahead and launch this. And if we are lucky, we should get something that looks like step number 17. And I'm still waiting for mine to load here. And it's not looking good. Right. Yeah, it's probably not going to. So now we got to figure out why. All right. So I know I'm going to email my instructor because I did get. I told you I did get a couple of these questions based on this. Is there anything that we can do here that we can look at that might help us? Yeah, let's go to the console and see what it says. It says, uncaught type error cannot read property, push, undefined. That sounds a little problematic to me. So now the question is, how do we fix this? So it's not recognizing a Jquery command is what's happening. Now, did anybody check the errata for this chapter? There isn't any. Okay. Yeah, that's right. It could have been fixed. All right. So then we do have a little tip here that points us to default JS line 7, and then all these connections to Jquery. Now I have some suspicions right away because when this book was written, the jQuery version was one point something, right? So we're talking like 2 full versions ago plus. So that's one consideration that I might think about right there. So one fix might be to actually try older jQuery libraries, or to figure out why it's not catching this method called push, which is part of the jQuery libraries. And that was one thing that when we looked at this in the code here, just the whole way that this was written was a little bit different, right? The ideal here is that this would automatically generate the pieces that we need. But notice that I have a little light bulb here. It says extract function into global scope. So it's not liking the way that this is being put together, basically. So my question for you is, should I be brave and do one of these auto fixes? Would that fix it? Okay. That sounds like the voice of experience, Richard. All right. So which of these options did you try? Yeah, that's a good technique. I like that approach because that's what I would do. You know, I mean, why not? All right, but I think the problem does go a little bit deeper than that. So let's see if we can figure out a way to make it actually work. So what I'm going to do temporarily here is I'm going to pause the video. We're going to find a fix, and then we're going to move on. Sound like a plan? Okay. And yes, we'll still work a break in there. All right, so a little bit of a discussion here in class, folks, about how to get this to work. And one thing that you have to realize is when this book was written, they were using 1.8.3 as we were talking about for jQuery. Now we're on version 3. Whatever, and they actually have some issues with this because it's a command that was basically deprecated with older versions. The thing that's kind of interesting about it is you can actually just downgrade your jQuery files to the ones that are in the book. Actually, anything I think prior to 3 and it will work. Or as one student discovered for us and shared, which I put here in the bottom of the course shell for that unit, is this document. And in the document, it tells you basically that you just need to add this little piece of script here, which basically points to the repository that allows for the migration from the old version to the new version. So I know for some of you that works. So let's just go ahead and try that. I'm just going to copy it right from that document. I'm going to drop that into my HTML file, if I can figure out where the heck that is. I guess that's here. So we're just going to throw that in. And actually, probably the smart way to do this is to put it above our default JS file. Right? I see you nodding, like the voice of experience there too. And really what this is doing is it's pointing to this jQuery library that basically allows for the migration of some older commands to work in newer commands. So let's give it a shot with this little addition and see if that makes the difference. And hopefully it does. Okay. Now, if that did not work for you, then you might want to try the other approach. I am going to pause the video right now to help you guys through it.